Here we are.
48-hour art check, and we're changing up the format.
Oh, yes.
48-hour art check! All right.
Yes.
So, one time I, back in college, was a communication major, and I visited several live broadcast facilities like local news and radio and stuff like that. I was
Nice.
always shocked at how they didn't really pay attention to the countdown to going live. Like, they'd be having like a normal conversation, wandering around, not even sitting in their chair, and then like every single time they would be in the right spot at the right time and immediately start talking right when they need to.
Yeah.
And I don't have that ability because I forgot what round it was, so I just made something up. But we are actually changing the format today. So, yeah. So we can talk about that a little bit. I think
right.
we've been doing this now, I don't know what round it is, but over 30 rounds. We're at 33 or 4 or something, right?
Yeah, something like that. I honestly lost count too.
Okay, so a lot, 30 plus.
Mhm.
And I feel like Josh and I had a conversation after the last one. It's getting a little bit redundant. And we both felt like we were taking about 30 seconds to describe what it was that we were doing. And then kind of just waffling. That might be a British term. Kind of just making crap up.
Yeah, because
or
you
kind
see
of
the
spreading.
timer. Yeah, you see the timer. It's like 2 minutes, and you finished what you needed to say in 30 minutes, or 30 seconds. So you feel like this obligation to fill up like a minute and 30.
Yeah.
And so like we were both kind of feeling like, well, maybe we can like kind of change it up. And also because we're both such talkative people, we were like, we're definitely going over the 15-minute
Right.
thing every time. And that's going to be hard for us to balance because, as you guys know, if you follow the show, we spin a lot of plates.
Yeah.
And so just having another, like hour to have to spin is pretty difficult. So
And then
we also realized, like, just for content for you guys, like we wanted to kind of shift it up and change it up a little bit. So
yeah, and a main thing for me was a main thing for me is that I felt like we would come on to really interesting topics, but then we'd like brush by them or cut ourselves off because that wasn't the format.
yeah,
And so what we're doing is we're still going to do 15 minutes, but and I just realized I haven't come up with the topic timer, so I'll have to do that. But what we've done now is we now have 30 seconds per stage. So I'm going to spend 30 seconds talking about what I've accomplished. You'll spend 30 seconds talking about what you've accomplished. And so instead of being 4 minutes per stage, we're now going to do 1 minute per stage. And you got to get it done or else. Because we're going to build in some more, like, there's going to be buzzers. We don't have them yet. But I got the timer done. And so what that will open up is that if something comes up and we're like, hey, we want to talk about existentialism, or I want to like pontificate on why Maximilien Robespierre is relatable to today's political society, and we should all learn from what happened with the guillotine back in the French Revolution. We're going to have some time to talk about that. Those are two very boring examples that I just gave. There's other things that we could talk about, but like all the time, I feel like Josh and I are going, yeah, well, we got to move on once it starts getting interesting.
exactly.
Yeah, and so I think we've with this new format, we've cut down on the boring parts and we've opened it up to more interesting parts.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Do you want to say anything else on that, or should we try to just try it?
I think you nailed it. I will just say, for you guys, it can also be entertaining to watch two fairly long-winded people try to hit a 30-second mark. So that's going to be kind of you guys could almost make a drinking game of it. Like, if we can't make the mark, have a drink.
Yeah.
Or something like that. All right, let's do it.
Okay, so the timer's going to start with you this time.
Okay.
I'm gonna make a buzzing noise with my mouth because I forgot to put in an actual sound effect. You can do
All
the
right.
same
Sounds
thing to
good.
me, but I'm gonna buzz you at
I
30.
will.
And
All
here's
right.
our
So my goals achieved. I got the progress I was hoping to get done on my page. I managed to, uh, let's see, I kind of basically would like to get further, but I did manage to like add more characters to it, and I'm about at like the halfway point. So that's pretty much for that. I also got to a minute 45 on my kinetic type video. I maintained my workout. Boom.
Okay, I have not worked out in a long time, and I'm going to. I did an interview with Brandon Dayton on Illotalk, and that was pretty interesting. And also, I will talk about that during challenges. I've updated the text of my project a little bit, though I've missed my deadline because I don't have a presentation, like a pitch ready for that. And then I also animated this timer, which is pretty cool and took me way longer than it should.
All right. Okay. Was that all of them? I
Yeah,
hope you
so
got
challenges.
Cool. Challenges. So my struggles was dealing with creative doubts, which we've got into the last time. Juggling effectively, wanting to keep comics as my main creative goal, but suddenly getting distracted by other shiny objects, and artistically trying to keep my characters unique within a limited style on a crowd scene. So that's my.
So
All right.
my challenges are a little bit weird, but I had a ton of technical difficulties. I actually accidentally streamed to Josh's channel and maybe some rando's channel because I don't know, because it took 3 times to finally get on there. And then I've been dealing with like lately anxiety, and yesterday was just like ramped up to 11 and was totally crazy, and the technical difficulties being live didn't help that at all.
Oh wow, we should probably use the anxiety thing a little later for
Okay.
maybe our longer topic because that sounds like something to dip into. What are we doing now? Goals?
Plans, yeah.
Plans. Okay. Finish at least 3/4 of my rough pencils for the next page of quarterly stories, and get up at get up to 2:15 on the kinetic type video, and continue my daily working out and play an awesome show tonight because my band's playing a gig tonight and it should be fun.
And I'm going to make an appointment at some point in time to go see a doctor. I think that's going to help. Then I also am going to finish the pitch because I've got all the text done that I want to get done and everything like that. And then I want to animate the rest of the new format for this. So we'll have a timer, and I'm now realizing that I want to put some spaces in between switching stages. And that's it.
All right, cool. I like it. I almost like it without space. It's challenging.
That's right. It just
All right.
keeps
Well,
going.
that was cool. So now that we're done with that bit, do you want to touch more on the anxiety stuff? I think that's an issue that might relate to other people. If not, we can do it at another
it was
time.
interesting because it was kind of a little bit meta as well, because I was talking to Brandon during the interview about anxiety and depression, and I was wondering what he thought because I noticed I've never had anxiety or depression until 2 things happened. One is I've been in a lot of car accidents. I get hit a lot. I've been in like 15 car accidents, and like I've had only 3 of them are at fault. And this one month was kind of the same month that I started drawing and putting my stuff out there. I had been drawing for a few months, and then I wanted to put stuff up on the internet. And as soon as I started doing that, I was hit by a car on my bicycle twice that month, actually. I was hit as I was coming out of the parking lot, and I wrenched my knee really bad, and then I was rear-ended as I was waiting for a left turn. And when I went to the chiropractor and they did x-rays, and I told them my medical history from the injuries and stuff, because I also did rock climbing and stuff, they're like, you shouldn't be walking. Like, there's no way that, like, I don't understand how you're able to, like, function as a skeleton. And so anyway, he's like, so what kind of symptoms do you have? And I was like, I don't know. I've been really worried about stuff a lot. And anyway, and so his hypothesis, which seemed to bear fruit, was that I had some fairly severe soft tissue damage that was triggering anxiety, but it also coincided with like sharing my stuff publicly on the internet. And so I was able to, that summer really sucked, and I had a lot of anxiety attacks, like hugging my knees, rocking back and forth, the world's ending anxiety attacks, which was new to me in my 30s, and I'd never experienced anything like that. Anyway, I've repaired the soft tissue damage, and I haven't had any attacks that severe since then, which was years ago. But now I have kind of a low-level, slow drip of anxiety fairly consistently. And I'm wondering if I should get some like situational, like not like constant medication, but some like, because there's flare-ups, and if I know there's some medication where it's like I can just take it situationally, because I'll get an email from somebody that is kind of innocuous. It could be good or bad, and it's vague. You know, I will immediately assume that means that I'm going to be fired. Like and then I will think about that for the rest of the day, and it's just this crippling thing. Or you know, with my art, when I put something out there, as soon as I put something out there, I immediately start thinking of every flaw on that thing that I just put up. And then I extrapolate that out to how that will somehow make it so that I can't feed my family or pay rent. You know what I mean? Like, I just come up with these scenarios that will, these unlikely chain of dominoes that will just trip everything up. And I don't know how much of that is an artist thing and how much of that is I'm pretty messed up from being hit by cars so often.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I would definitely recommend like I've taken, you know, antidepressants when I was suffering from some pretty severe depression for about like a year or two, and I would encourage people, if they need it, to kind of seek it out. And it doesn't have to be antidepressants. It could be therapy. It could be anything like that if you're having kind of a mental struggle. But there's also situational, you know, anxieties too. Like, for instance, like, you know, the situation you're in right now, you've got a newborn. So, I mean, that right there is going to trigger anxiety in the best of people, because you're literally putting yourself in conditions that cause mental breakdowns. Like, all new parents are like in a sleep deprivation tank, and are being asked to think rationally and think really short term and think really long term at the same time. And it's like a condensed, it's just a very exaggerated reality, having a newborn, honestly. I mean, so I think it sounds like a mix, honestly. It sounds like it's, you know, it might be an issue you struggle with. And then I think a lot of it is the artistic thing. It's a realm of vulnerability. And I think that, actually, it's interesting. I think it's a couple things. Because I think with artists, we're putting our work out there. And if you're making work that means anything to you, you're kind of vulnerably having to kind of put out stuff you poured years into, or a year into, or half a year into, that was meaningful to you enough to put it out there. And it's a bit like, you know, it's unlike music, where it's like tonight I'm playing a show, and we've rehearsed and we've done preparation, and we're going to rehearse today. And when I get up and play that show, I'm going to know within about 10 minutes whether we're doing it or not. Because I'm going to see that audience reaction. And it's nerve-wracking before you go up, but by the time you finish the show, you know how you did. You know if you bombed, because there's an audience immediately there. And it's one of the things I like about playing music that's different than comics. It's like, I could be making brilliant stuff, and for one thing, I don't even know if there's an audience,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I'm not in a room full of those people, and so I can't gauge the reaction like
Yeah.
quickly. And it's also like it takes time to read it and to see it, and so it's less immediate, and so there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think uncertainty breeds a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
Um, so there's that with art. And then I think for you and I think we're similar personalities, which is why we've ended up in like director positions, which is like the type A personality where you are really good at thinking long term and planning.
Right.
And uh, that has an upside, but then it has a downside because if you're thinking day to day, you can lose sight of the overall goal, and that can be a real problem. That's great for somebody like in my workplace. That's great for a graphic designer because they need to think about getting the thing done. But for a leader of a graphic designer, it's not so great because you have to think about the overall thing, right? Um, the downside of the long term thinking is that just what you were just talking about, the doomsday scenario stuff.
Yeah.
Because if you're able to kind of follow dominoes to where they're going to fall, the plus side is you can plan well and you can kind of create contingencies for if failure happens. Um, but or I guess that would be the upside. The downside would be, those contingencies can start seeming like reality, and
Right.
and it's all future thinking, which is no more real than anything because
Yeah.
for all we know today I could like walk out of the house and that could be my last day on earth. I mean,
Yeah.
um, so like planning's good, but anyhow, I guess what I'm saying is like I think with art though, I do think there, at least for myself, and I know artists who are not like this, but
Mm-hmm.
I definitely know a lot of artists who are. It does feel like I'm very invested in it,
Yeah.
and like it or not, I'm very invested in it, and not necessarily to have like material success, but almost like existentially invested in it, you know.
Right.
And so it's like uh, it does cause like a little bit of anxiety and stuff. And I think if it's to a certain extent where it's unmanageable, then seeking help or situationally trying to kind of redesign things
Yeah.
is pretty much the only responses to have. I don't know. Like, do you think it's art? Like, what do you think?
I,
What do you think?
I think I think it can be for two reasons. One is, if I was an accountant, very few people understand what a good accountant or a bad accountant looks like visibly. And so, and Brandon brought this up yesterday, in most occupations, if you are grossly negligent, then people know it. But beyond that, there's almost no difference between like bare minimum and extreme excellence, because I don't know what a doctor does. I'm not sure what like it's not visible, but most people consume a huge amount of visuals and a huge amount of entertainment. And most of them are not necessarily trained or educated in how to create it or how to critique it, but they all have an opinion of it because of the consumption of it. And so when I produce something and I put that out there, everyone can have an opinion because they have eyeballs. And so it's a much more vulnerable position to be in than, say, a plumber. If there's a leaky faucet, then the plumber did something wrong. But beyond that, between like leaky faucet and some sort of exceptionally incredible high craftsmanship, the general consumer has no concept of the difference of those things. Whereas an artist, I can look at somebody's stuff, and I can look at somebody else's stuff, and I can see a quality difference. At least I can see a style difference. But you can definitely, everybody knows what a person looks like, so you can definitely see anatomical problems, people naturally recognize something wrong with the human face because we spend so much of our time reading it and trying to do nonverbal cues. And so if you draw something a little bit off, people will know that. And so I think, you know, the vulnerability of creation, in addition to, you know, the general vulnerability of everyone being able to be a critic of your work because it's visible. I think those two things are key points.
Yeah, I think you're right in I think there's also, tacking onto that, there's also the fact that it's measurable with a plumber. The plumber comes to your house, you've got like your toilet's just spilling water everywhere. They come, they fix it. It's fixed, like, and you can measure it because you go, okay, there's no water spilling. Or you go to the doctor and you're sick, you get a prescription and or you get surgery or whatever, and the thing's either gone or it's continuing. So you know whether it was a success or a failure. Whereas with art, it's less measurable because it's less easily defined. Like people barely even, you know, have a consensus on what art is in general, you know?
Yeah. And a lot of it is because everything we're mentioning is the elimination of a problem, and art is creation rather than subtraction.
And and sometimes it can be creating a new problem. It can, you know, it's a whole thing to itself, and it's a thing that artists themselves, like, especially, you know, you're in academia, that's a huge thing in academia. It's like when you're talking about art, it becomes problematic because it's hard to even define what it is.
Right.
And so even for the artists, like it's hard for me to define why, like, some punk bands are incredible to me and they can't play a chord, and there's some that just sound like BS and noise, and it's this weird, like, which one is it? And so when you're in a situation like that, it's harder to measure because you put it out there, you don't know. You don't know if maybe you're making something that'll be appreciated after you're gone, because that's happened in art.
And it's exceptionally difficult to gauge success because there's no elimination of a problem. There's no punch list. There's no checklist. There's just an infinitely high ceiling that you never know if you hit it. And if you're like, that's the other thing that I struggle with, is my dissatisfaction often causes me negative feelings and emotions, but is also a major part and drive to how I improve. And so I don't want to eliminate the dissatisfaction in my life because that is making me a better artist, but it also makes it so that I never quite feel like I have achieved anything because I'm dissatisfied.
I think that's one of the hardest things, and like that's something I've been working on in the last like year or so, was like I was looking at myself and realizing like I rarely actually like kind of celebrate the stuff that I have achieved, or the stuff that the little steps that I've taken towards the end goal. More often than not, I'm usually looking at like the comic that I haven't finished. I'm not looking at the comics I have finished.
Right.
And then it's hard, you know, that creates a dual problem, because on one hand, it makes me less good at marketing my work because I don't care as much about my older stuff.
Yeah.
So that's one negative. The other is it creates this kind of false narrative that I haven't achieved anything.
Right.
And what's interesting is usually when I get in conversations with other artists, I'll kind of bring up like a design I did, like, or a client I worked for, and they're like, "You worked for that?" Like, and these are people I might have known for years. Yeah. It's just I don't tend to bring up a lot of my successes. And so I think that with goal setting and with like just for marketing your own work, it's really important for especially personality types that are going to be, you know, trying to, you know, possibly motivated by dissatisfaction, create something new. You got to kind of come up with systems to kind of measure your success. to counter that false narrative that your brain's going to create. Because there's the positives, you're going to make art, but you know, there's some negatives that you can counter just by trying to kind of track and your successes. And I mean, I know like entrepreneurs have to do that all the time, because when you start businesses, like you know, the general likelihood of success is pretty slim. So it's like, you know, most entrepreneurs are going to have a bunch of failed businesses, you know, and before having a successful business, they're going to have a long list of non-successes. And so it's like, in order to stay motivated in that, I hear a lot of entrepreneurs have to do that, like, you know, track their successes. And I'm not trying to talk about like self-help type stuff. I'm just talking about like stuff I think about. Right. For me, it's like even working on quarterly stories, I'm so deep into it. It's easy for me to think about the time that I've lost working on it, and not think about like what I've learned or achieved along the way of doing it. And it's easy for me to get into doomsday predictions of where it'll go. But it's weird that it's not so easy for me to possibly see some positives out of it. Like, you know, and I think that's one of those things is like, it's like, how do you keep that dissatisfaction to the point where you're creating art and creating compelling art and trying to do something that's your own and authentic, and at the same time juggle it with a healthy dose of like realism with the way you're looking at it. Because I think at least with me, with mental illness and stuff, like realism doesn't tend to come into the equation. Like, you feel like it's a really realistic viewpoint, right? But in general, it's like my mind will kind of convince me to just focus on negatives. And it becomes this false reality, because it's like, you know, while those negatives might be true, there's also a whole bunch of information and disregarding because of like cognitive bias created by whatever that mental illness is. Like, so if it's anxiety, it's like the anxieties always have like a kernel of truth to them. You know, it's like, you know, we are on a risky planet. There's a lot of risk to living. You know, I mean, you have a newborn, it's like you see that risk 24/7. It's like we were talking about the last one. It's crazy people even live to be, you know, 1 year old, you know? And so yeah, we're in a system that's full of risk, but we're also in a system full of like beauty and truth, and there's goodness, and there's all sorts of other stuff that the anxiety will just kind of counter, you know, like ignore as part of the narrative. And so it's like, well, as artists, I think, at least for me, I think it's really important for me to kind of remember, for one thing, like why I'm doing it, like what's the goal. And, you know, the goal's not money, because I'm making a living now, you know. I don't need to be a wild success money-wise. I don't think the goal is success, because I have some opinions of like stuff that is successful and yet I would never want to do, and yet it's wildly financially successful. So I have to think the goal is just to make something valuable, like that's art, and like that will move people, and hopefully will say something true about reality that moves somebody, you know. And it's like, if that's my goal, am I achieving that? And I have to say, like, I feel like I am with quarterly stories, and I don't think that's completely insane, because like I don't have a ton of readers, but the people I've had read it, every time somebody reads quarterly stories, usually it's followed by a really candid discussion about mental illness, where people are like usually really guarded about discussing it, and they'll just like open up and start talking about it. And it kind of brings up some deep things in people. And so I think,
and if that's the only thing that it does ever, that is a huge and massive and potentially life-changing success for every person that has that experience.
And I think that's the, and it's funny because you say that, and like literally my brain disregards it and goes, yeah, but that's like two people, and like the rest of, like, but if nobody reads it, you know, it's the tree that fell in the forest.
Yeah.
So that's like, I have a brain that's geared towards kind of
Imposter
somewhat
syndrome.
imposter syndrome and negative self-doubt, and also a lot of kind of almost like happiness sabotage. And so I have to be conscious of that. Like when I hear that little voice, to kind of be like, dude, well, that's not me. I mean, that's not, and you know, I don't know, it can tie into faith too, because like, there's this thing and for those of you who don't have like beliefs or anything, in supernatural things, that's okay. I'm not doing this proselytize, just my own thing. But it's like, there's a verse about, like the devil being the accuser of the brethren or something. And I always have to kind of remember that, because a lot of like kind of negative thinking is not like of God or whatever. And maybe taking that outside of religion, it's just, I think in general, just, there's psychological studies that talk about the addiction of negative thinking.
Yeah.
It's got the same kind of quality as like an amphetamine, where it's like, you know, your brain really gets off on negative thinking, right, and wants more, just like it would with caffeine or with like any addictive substance. It's like you get a little of it, and it encourages the overuse of it. And so it's hard, because to be an artist, you have to be a skeptic, you have to be analyzing. But I don't know what the balance is, you know. I don't know.
Yeah. And we could probably keep talking about this for a while.
Oh yeah,
because I just thought of a bunch of stuff. But yeah, there's also entropy, right? If you want to take it from a scientific standpoint, we live in a system that is built where everything is constantly degrading and breaking down into basic element. Like that's what entropy is things breaking down, the decay, the death. You know, the constant whatever. You know, many religions would talk about that we're living in a fallen state, and many scientists are talking about like the circle of life, where you're talking about, you know, without decay and decomposition, there can be no elemental matter to build a new life, and there's this cycle and whatever. But part of that is that we live in a system where it trends towards negative because of entropy. And I don't think that that's just physical. I think that's also, you know, emotional and mental and everything else, that you have to go out of your way to, you will always go down without an effort to move up. You know, if I don't work out, I will atrophy.
Yeah.
But if I work out, I can maintain stasis or hypertrophy. But the natural state of everything is always to degrade, which I think is why art is incredible, is because it's creation in the face of that.
Yeah, no, and like when like I mean, art is creating a narrative structure in the face of chaos, and it you know, I think if you're like when I was an atheist, like I used to view it as art was us creating a system that that kind of replicates like God, basically. It's like our desire to have this false narrative. This is at the time, but this false narrative of like a creator who's got a story and a purpose and stuff like that. Like we are able to actually be our own gods by creating our own stories. And that was kind of my theory for like years. And as a Christian, I see it as more of like, it's a mirror of the creator himself. And so it's like, but regardless, like I said, regardless of how you think, when you're making art, you're making something unusual to counter that world we live in, where there is constant consumption and just degradation of things. And as an artist, you're like, either you're like photographing it and saying like, hey, dude, there's this thing happening of constant destruction and eroding. Isn't that weird? you're documenting it, which is a weird thing. Or you're countering it and you're putting something new out there, and you are making, and that's a weird thing to do. In the face of it, it's almost like a futile thing, but we still do it, and we still feel driven to do it and consume it. So I think it's man, this is a topic we could go for quite a few of these on, but I think that that's a good thing to remember too. Like when you're doing it, like you're actively involving yourself in this act of just that's counter to everything around you. So of course you're going to experience resistance when you do it, even from yourself, because it's a lot easier to go with the flow and just degrade.
Yeah, right.
You know, so it's a difficult task. You know, I have a gig tonight with a band, and I'm way too old to be in a band, but it's fun, and I've done one so far with this band, and it was a lot of fun. We played punk rock. We were the most like hardcore band in the set list, and we're old dudes, you know, which is kind of a nice position to be in. But like the act of doing that is so fun, and being able to put something new out there. Like we're not playing cover songs, we're just writing new music, and being able to have like a little moment where you get to kind of move people and get them riled up. It's a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it, you know? And is there like a long-term existential point to that? No, there's just a joy to doing it. And so I kind of like, it's easy for me to remember that with short-term stuff like a gig, where it's like the next day. But with like something like my comic, I kind of forget that it's kind of the same game as playing a show for people. Like you're not, it doesn't have, like there can be joy in it, and that could be like the purpose of it. It's like, hey, you know, this is doing this because I love comics, and this is my contribution to that thing, whatever it is, you know. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. So here's what I'm thinking, and we can kind of figure this out. As we were talking, I think I should have a timer where we go back and forth, and then one of us has to have a 30-second wrap up of what we just talked about, and they can also do the credits. So
I like it.
But yeah, I think it'll be a good format, but we definitely need to throw a timer because we are now at 38 minutes on this one.
Well, this is going to be the struggle with bringing up topics and kind of allowing them to get interesting. Is the more interesting they get, the longer we're going to want to go. So that timer will be essential. So yeah, cool. So who do you want to do the 30-second wrap up?
Yeah. So here's a 30-second wrap up. I think. Let me put an actual timer on this. It'll say the wrong thing, but it'll give me something to talk to. I think that that anxiety and depression are not required for art, but I think they often go hand in hand because of a number of factors. And I also think that some of those are part of imposter syndrome, and some of those, cause imposter syndrome. And not everybody has that, not everybody deals with it, and everybody's experience is different. But recognizing your successes and being realistic about your achievements is just as important as recognizing what's not going on or what you hope might not happen. So there's a 30-second deal. Okay, so the next time that we meet, I will have more timers done, and it will be much shorter. But we would be really interested to see and hear what you guys think about our topics. We want to get more into a discussion, and we'll be incorporating the chat. I've figured out a way to get the chat to work in a way where I can pull it up on the screen. So those of you that are watching this later, if you join us live, we'll be part of the show as well. The intro art was done by Josh, and you can check out his stuff at quarterlystories.com. And we have been discussing a major point of his comic. And so if you found this even remotely interesting, I would go read Quarterly Stories if you haven't yet. I've done this a lot where I'll be following somebody and I'll interact with them a lot, and then I realize like a year has gone by and I haven't read their stuff. And so if that's you, go read Josh's comic, because very much ties into what we talked about today. You can see my stuff at corykerr.com. And special thanks to No Saboteurs. And go to facebook.com/No Saboteurs if you are in the in somewhere in California. And you'll know where those shows are. I don't know where the show is, but I'm too far away anyway. So, but if you're near Josh, then go check him out tonight. And we'll catch you guys later. We're out.
Bye.